This video is an addendum in addition to the first one on sociobiology. Now look at our beagle, Molly. Isn't she really cute? I hope you'd all agree that this is a cute dog. Well, biologists would tell us that we're kind of genetically programmed to find some critters cute and others not so cute. Of course, it's real important for carrying on our species that we typically find babies to be cute, right? With the fairly big head relative to body size, fairly round, big eyes relative to the head. So Molly kind of fits that kind of description, a fairly nice size head relative to her body, not too angular, kind of big eyes there, big brown eyes. Yeah, isn't she cute? And babies and our pets kind of tend to make us want to nurture them, right? And that's all part of sociobiology. So I'll let Molly go now to pursue other interests. And while we're speaking of dogs, or I'm speaking of dogs, dogs are closely related to wolves and coyotes. As you know, they basically came from wolves through artificial selection. Some of our ancestors started to select for wolves who were friendlier, who hung around the human settlement, hung around the campfire, and actually, depending on how you define species, dogs, wolves, and coyotes are part of the same species. That is, they can procreate and generate offspring who can also procreate themselves, reproduce. So that's one of the definitions of a species, that it can reproduce with other members. And, if something's from another species, it can't. But there's also another standard or criterion for whether something is part of the same species, and that's whether the population actually has the opportunity to reproduce. And so dogs, wolves, coyotes don't get together to reproduce, so they're not a species in that sense. Okay, just a little bit more on evolution and speciation, in that case more generally. But a little bit more on sociobiology besides this cuteness, and we could say, what kind of animals are not so cute? Well, rats, for example, that really sharp, angular face, beady eyes, small eyes, beady eyes. So typically, we do not find rats to be cute. On the other hand, kind of like my beagle, koala. This is Kiki, the koala bear. Obviously not a live koala bear, but kind of again rather cute, with a nice round face, pretty nice eyes there. Say hello, Kiki. Hi. All right. The other thing sociobiologically that I want to talk about, it has to do with altruism. You know what altruism is? That's wanting to do something because you are concerned about someone else and actually want to do it for them. So it's not, it's not selfishness. So if you're doing it just to look good, or so you can think good of yourself, that would not be genuine altruism. But if you do it because you are really concerned about that other human being or about that other animal, that would be altruism. If you're willing to sacrifice something of your own, or even sacrifice your own life, and that's the big issue in in sociobiology and maybe biology even more generally. Why and how willing might we be to actually give up our own lives for someone else? And there are some rather mechanistic folks who would, as far as sociobiology is concerned, would say it's all a matter of the arithmetic. That is, we share 50% of our genes with our siblings, with a brother or sister. We share the same 50% with the mother or father, biologically speaking. We share 25% with our grandparents, with uncles, aunts, nieces, nephews. First cousins, we share 12.5%. So according to this arithmetic, basically we're programmed to be willing to give up our lives, say for 2 siblings, 4 nieces, nephews, or uncles, or aunts, and for 12 first cousins. And there's actually some who say that, this is really the way it is, that we're kind of genetically determined to be altruistic and even to sacrifice our lives based on how closely our genes are related to the person we're deciding whether we're going to save or not. Give up our own life for their sake. And for me, that all sounds rather absurd. Of course, usually when we have to decide whether we're going to be willing to sacrifice our life, we don't have time to calculate what the genetic arithmetics are. And, there are a fair number of people over the years who kind of spontaneously will try to rescue someone who's drowning, even though they might and sometimes do end up drowning themselves. According to this kind of arithmetic, we shouldn't be willing to give up our lives, say, for a child we adopt who may have no genetic relation to ourselves. So this kind of idea that we're rather fairly strictly programmed, genetically programmed to give up our lives only for, because our genes are telling us they want to be passed on through other people, because, if we give up our lives, obviously we can't pass them on ourselves, but our genes are so smart and selfish, Richard Dawkins, the selfish gene, that we will kind of over the long haul, we'll follow these kinds of arithmetic or mathematical arithmetic predictions. So again, I think that's quite absurd. We evolved to be pro-social, have what we call scientifically, biologically pro-social emotions. We have compassion, we have sympathy, we have empathy for other human beings, and that kind of can compete with our own self-interest. And we talked earlier about, cooperation, our tendencies to cooperate, competing with our tendencies to compete. And we have some decisions to make, and our cultures can kind of encourage us somewhat more, one way or the other, to be more compassionate, to be less compassionate, more callous towards others. But rather, I think we have these general tendencies that we inherit in terms of sociobiology, but again, it's not just genetically determined, it's also our society, our culture, it's also our own decisions that figure into the mix of how altruistic you or I will be.